As a club racer, I'm really keen to understand how I accurately measure the fuel in my car and the consumption, and just check the accuracy of all the different measurements I've got available to me. Now, it turns out that this information is equally useful for anyone who has a road car, and we'll see that my findings are equally applicable. We'll start with some background about my car and how I use it. We'll then look at the layout of the tank and the sensors, the fuel level sensors within it. We'll look at the method I use to measure the usage. We'll look at draining the tank, which turns out to be quite a challenge. We'll then take a look at me actually making some measurements. I'll then look at the results of those measurements. I'll also combine that information with fuel consumption during a race. And we're going to take a look at this one thing about how can you tell if one of the fuel sensors is faulty. So I felt that it was useful to add that. And then we'll close out with some conclusions. I race in a series called the 116 Trophy, and it's a 90-minute endurance race with 2 compulsory pit stops, and importantly, we're not allowed to refuel the cars. So we tend to brim the cars, which means at some tracks we're probably carrying around fuel that we don't need. And that's one of the drivers behind this presentation and this whole investigation. The car is a BMW 116i E87 N45. So my one was built in February 2006. All of the cars are in the range from 2004 to 2006. They're pretty standard, so there's a small amount of modification which brings them up to about 130 brake horsepower. But importantly, the fuel system is standard, so all the way from the tank, along the fuel line, into the fuel rail for the injectors, it's all as per a standard car. My objective with this investigation was to determine how much I need to put into the car to complete a race. And to do that, I need to understand the accuracy of the measurement systems that are available to me and the consumption, the fuel consumption of the car. You'll have to excuse my rather basic artistry here. It's the main point I wanted to make here is there's a right-hand compartment to the fuel tank and a left-hand compartment. The right-hand side has a greater capacity than the left. And when you fill the car, it fills the right-hand side until it's full, and then it starts to spill over into the left side. So the question is, how does it get back from the left to the right? Well, when the fuel pump is running, it scavenges fuel out of the left side and dumps it into the right-hand side. The Owner's Handbook says that the fuel tank capacity is 50 litres. And I've also heard people mention 52 litres and 55 litres, but what we'll later discover is that none of those numbers are correct. There's a sensor in the left compartment and a pump and sensor in the right compartment. And the sensor consists of a little float on an arm that you see in that picture connected to a potentiometer. When the tank is empty, the potentiometer has a resistance of 59 ohms, and when it's full, it has a resistance of 992. And it's the same measurement on both sides, same range of resistances, although we'll see that one side, the left side, doesn't move until the fuel starts to spill over from the right side. I'm not completely certain how the DME handles the sensor, but I think it will be something like this, where we've got an analog to digital converter. On the analog side, we've got a voltage divider type arrangement with an internal resistor and then the sensor providing the other half of the divider. As the sensor resistance increases, the voltage increases, and so we get a higher digital output. Rather than it being 8-bit as I've shown here, it's probably a 16-bit value. But none of this really matters for our purposes, it's just useful background. My basic approach to this was to drain the tank, then add fuel. I started by adding 10 litres at a time, up to 40 litres, and then 1 litre at a time until the tank was full. And then after I added an amount of fuel each time, I would gather some data. So I gathered some CAN values for a CAN message hex 349, which gives left and right sensor measurements. It says I corrected it for ripples. What I mean by that is that when you add the fuel, the floats bob up and down, which means you get slight variations in the measurements, and I just eyeballed it and tried to average it out, but I think it's close enough. I also used my TopDon SmartDiag mini OBD scanner to get the real-time data values for the left and the right sensor, and these values were measured in litres, whereas the CAN values actually are a bit of an arbitrary measurement, which we'll see later. In my car I have an AIM Solo 2 data logger, and it collects a value called fuel percentage, so I captured that as well. Then I just looked at the gauge on the instrument cluster that you can see there in the picture on the right, and I sort of collected that information plus the range, which you see here says 499 kilometres. Okay, so you can see that I've got the fuel pipe, I've pulled it off the back of the little spigot on the end of the fuel rail, and then I've pulled it back underneath the car and poked it into this plastic fuel can. Obviously I did know that the fuel level was pretty low. Normally the fuel pump will only run when the engine is running. So that's not practical, I can't do that if I'm trying to drain the tank. So what I did was I pulled fuse 40 and then I applied power directly to the fuel pump. Now there's a couple of important notes here. If you have a car that's pre-September 2005, the fuel pump fuse is fuse 35, so that's the first thing. And the second thing is, if you have a one series that has a EKPS, is it called, the electronic pump computer, this method will not work, and don't try it, because the electric fuel pump on those cars is a 6-volt pump, not 12 volts, so don't even attempt it. Okay, so I'm sorry, focusing may be a bit of a problem here, but I hope you can see that I've pushed a little cable. I'll show you what type of cable it is, into the right hand edge of fuse 40. What I did was I pushed this cable in, and then I measured continuity to ground on the left hand side of the fuse holder. If I push the spade connector into the left hand side, it was an open circuit, which you would expect if you go back and look at the wiring diagram, because obviously that side is connected to the open relay contact. And then on the right hand side, it's measuring a very low resistance, which shows you that this is connecting through the winding and then to ground. These connectors, this is like a breakout system where you have these spade connectors, and then you have a sort of reverse, female side, and they come out into these types of connectors. And so what I've done is I've connected something onto there, I've connected that to this, to a cable which goes to this, and then I have battery power just there. You can see it under the dash. So if I turn on the my battery isolate, and then if I just touch this on here, so hopefully you can hear the fuel pump running. Do it again. Yeah, you can see there it does spark a little bit. Bear in mind that I've got a battery isolator, which does provide me with some protection from a short circuit. If you are insistent on doing this and you don't have a battery isolator, then please use a fuse in line with the cable, so that if you do anything silly, it'll just blow the fuse. Right, I've put the car back on the ground and I've connected up my laptop, which is tracing CAN messages, and I'm filtering on CAN ID hex 349, which is the should be the fuel level sensor. And you can see the values here and here. I think this one's the left and this one's the right, and this is probably going to be I can't think what it's called, byte swapped. So what this actually is reading is 01 FE and 01 FE that side. Over here we've got the OBD scanner, if I can just get that to focus, and as you can see that's showing 0 litres on both left and right sensors. Over here we've got my AIM data logger, and although it keeps flashing on and off, it is showing 0% fuel. I hope you can see that. It's not focusing particularly well, is it? There you go. Okay, and then of course over here on the gauges we've got 0, and you can see the range has got dash 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 for the range on the in the middle indicator on the dashboard. Okay, well, let's stick some fuel in it and see what we get. Right, I've now put exactly 10 litres of fuel into the car. We're getting no change in the left-hand indicator on the CAN signals, but as you can see we've had a change in the right-hand one. 08 Dog Easy, or Delta Easy, or yeah, whatever. It's varying a little bit, but you can see there is a change there. Over here, the OBD signals are showing 7.6 litres in the right hand sensor and nothing in the left. And over here it's showing 10.94%, and over here, although I had to press the button a couple of times, it's showing 95 kilometres range, and you can see that the dial gauge has gone up to about, is that the fourth little marker on the dial gauge. Okay, let's add another 10 litres. At this point I just kept adding 10 litres at a time up to 40 litres. By the way I was doing the 10 litre thing was I went down to local filling station and filled a can to 10 litres. In the UK they have to be very strict on the accuracy of the pumps, so I'm pretty certain that I had exactly 10 litres in the can each time. And then when I got to 40 I started to add 1 litre at a time, and I did this actually measuring it out in a measuring jug, which was fun, I can tell you. But the important thing was I got to a point where I hit a problem, and I'll show you that problem right now. So I'm now up to 55 litres. So at one point, I must admit, I did have a concern that I'd filled the carbon canister with petrol and it was now coming out of the vent from the carbon canister, but it's not that, because I took the pipe off the bottom of the carbon canister and it's completely dry. So it's not coming out of there. There is this sort of vent pipe that goes from the tank back up alongside the main pipe, and I think it's to vent air, and I think that's where it's coming out. I mean, it's not coming out at a heck of a rate, so it's not like whatever's at the end of this pipe is totally submerged, but I'm a bit frustrated that it's doing this, and I guess I've got a fault with the car. Let's move on and take a look at the results. So here you see the results represented in tabular form. So this is all the data that I collected. Let's explain the columns. So you've got the fuel in the tank as measured by, me measuring out the 10 litres and then 1 litre at a time. Then we've got the left and right figures that come from the CAN messages, and I've converted those into decimal values and then added them, summed them, so we've got a total for left and right. Couple of things to note here is I don't know what the absolute meaning of these values is. It's not really that important, but it could be something like, say, millivolts. If you think of the resistor I showed inside the DME and the sensor resistance, so that acts as a voltage divider, and as the sensor resistance goes up, so with the voltage. You could equally argue that it could be resistance in ohms, but that would still have to actually be measured using a voltage divider sort of technique, but hey, we don't really care, do we? Then we've got the OBD measurements. A couple of things to notice here. The first thing is, we'll ignore this number here for the moment, but if you notice, we keep pouring more and more fuel in, then we hit this value here, 31.5, and then it stays at that value. So it's at that point that that right-hand compartment of the tank is full, and the fuel is now spilling over into the left-hand side. The reason there's this anomaly just here is because after I put 40 litres into the car, for some reason I decided to rock the car to eliminate air from above the fuel, which was a bit of a stupid thing to do halfway through the measurements. So I think that explains why we've got a bit of a drop there, but you know, past that, it's pretty much as we expect. The other thing you notice here is that at 54 litres, the sensors have topped out. So now they're at their maximum range, and even though we're putting more fuel in, we're not getting any more different measurements from the OBD readings. And if you look on over here, it's pretty much the same. It stays pretty consistent. In fact, you can see here that it actually, from here to here, it's gone up a bit, then it goes down a bit, then it goes back up. I think this is back to this thing about the fuel rippling in the tank, where we're pouring more fuel in. You will notice that the OBD figures, so if we look at 40 litres just here, and we look over here at the total OBD figure, we've got 38.62. So it's about 1.4 litres below what it should be. And it remains consistently lower. So if we look here at 50 litres, it's showing 48.3. Very similar disparity. But otherwise, not bad actually, pretty good. The AIM Solo fuel percentage, which isn't a percentage as we've discussed, you can see that it tops out at 81.25. That is topping out at the same point as all of the other measurements that are coming from those CAN signals, or that are coming from the sensors. So I think this is, again, this is just some sort of aggregation of those left and right sensor values. Nothing much else to tell there, but this is useful because one reason is because when you race, this data gets permanently logged into the data logger, 20 times a second I think it's logged. And so what you can do is you can pull all that information out, not 20 times a second. What you do is you pull it out on a lap by lap basis. You can do maximum and minimum values on a lap by lap basis, and that means you can track the fuel as it diminishes, and we'll see that in a second when we look at a chart a bit further on. Here we've got the instrument cluster gauge, and we're just measuring it in graduations, so those are the little tick marks. The really good thing here, I think, is that at 50 litres it's showing full, so it's up to the 20 ticks, which is the full marker. That looks good, and we'll check that for linearity in a second when we look at another chart. What we do notice is, though, that this gauge obviously has some sort of mechanical stop because it tops out at 20.2 and then doesn't increase, even though we've got a couple more, a few more increases in the actual values being read off the sensors. And also that's borne out by the range, which continues to increase even though we're at 20.2, and then we get to 650 and everything tops out because the sensors have come to the top of their range. The instrument cluster range, I'm not quite sure how much use this is, but it is useful for cross-checking some of these things. Now, as you can see on this table, I only went to 57 litres, and what was obvious was it would have taken more fuel. It definitely would have taken another litre. I think it may have taken another 2. So I think the actual capacity of the car is between 58 and 59 litres. Okay, so in this chart, what we're looking at, let's look at the blue plot first. That's plotting those CAN values, the total CAN value. And you can see that it's not a straight line. So it's not a linear relationship. Hardly surprising when you think about, you've got a float on an arm connected to a rotating potentiometer. It's not going to be linear. But what you do notice is that if we plot the instrument cluster gauge values, that little meter we've got in on the instrument cluster, that does look pretty straight. That's pretty much a straight line. Now, just to explain, up here it gets a bit lumpy. The reason is because if you remember, I poured in 10 litres, 20 litres, 30 litres, 40 litres, and then I did a litre at a time, and that's why it looks a bit more uneven. And you've got to remember that I'm just looking at the gauge and eyeballing it and, trying to judge exactly what the value is. So you're going to get a little bit of inaccuracy here. But you can see that it's pretty much a straight line. Now, the thing that I find interesting here is that to convert the CAN total to the instrument cluster value, I would imagine the way it's done is with a lookup table in the DME. So you would have a lookup table with an index of the CAN total value, and then that would read off the the absolute value of how much fuel is in the tank. There might be a mathematical relationship. You might be able to come up with some formula to connect the blue to the orange line, but my feeling is probably not. I doubt it's that easy to calculate, but maybe. Okay, let's look at another comparison. So here we've got the aim fuel versus the fuel gauge. The reason I'm interested in this obviously is because if I'm using the logged data as historical data, which I look at after a race, then I need to understand this relationship. And you can see that it's very good. I mean, that's really good. And the amazing thing is the aim line looks even better than the instrument cluster gauge. I mean, it's a pretty straight line. So I was pleasantly surprised with that. As I've already said, I don't think it's the percentage of fuel in the tank. It's not, the tank is not 82.15% full at the top of this range because it's 100% full because we brimmed it. But you can see that up here you can see where the sensor stops measuring, and you can also see that the gauge actually tops out before the sensors top out. So yeah, that just is a reflection of what we already saw in the data. Okay, so we've spent a lot of time looking at the accuracy of the various measurements. Let's now look at the fuel burn rate. So this is the burn rate from my last race at Thruxton. And let me explain what we have here. The blue plot is the actual measured amount of fuel left in the tank as measured by the AIM Solo, and it's that fuel percentage value that we've spoken about. Then what I've done is I've added some trend lines. I've just roughly added trend lines, but it is quite marked. That marks the difference between the sort of three different distinct trends. Now, if you've seen my Thruxton video, you'll know that we were concerned in the early part of the race that we were using the fuel faster than we thought we should be. So if you look at the trend line here and follow it all the way down, if we had have kept burning the fuel at that rate, we would have run out of fuel about 20 minutes before the end of the race, which obviously would have been disastrous. But what we found was that the trend changed, and it changed after a pit stop, but I can't say that the pit stop was the absolute inflection point, actually. We also had a safety car period at 30 minutes in, so that's around this point here. Again, not really, I don't know. It may explain this bit here, but yeah, it's difficult to understand why that we got this change in trend. And again, we got another change in trend later on. Now, the bizarre thing that was that if we just look at some of the background information, the tank was brimmed to, well, I'm calling it 58 litres, okay? We did the 2 stops. We had a safety car period for 3 laps. Now, the really ridiculous thing is I was conserving fuel for the first 30 minutes, so I was short shifting and keeping the revs below 6,500 RPM. You would think this would not be so steep. You would think this would be shallower, and then it would get steep when we decided that I could push. But we've got exactly the opposite, which is a bit weird, and I can't quite explain that. And we did 52 laps plus we do a rolling start, so we had a green flag lap, and I had about 11 litres left in the tank, which I've managed to calculate using the table that we looked at earlier. That's been a real benefit, you know, that I can now actually work out how much fuel I've got left. If I calculate this out, it means that I was using about 0.9 litres per lap. Now, this is a very similar number to the value that I'd calculated some months ago for Snetterton. Now, Snetterton is about the same length. It's slightly longer than Thruxton. Thruxton is quite a long track, but Snetterton's slightly longer. But you don't go as fast around Snetterton. There is a long straight. You do go fast down that straight, but it's Thruxton, half the track, you're going flat out. So this is pretty much in line with what I'd already calculated for the other track. Okay, before we come on to the conclusions, let's look at this business about determining if a fuel sensor has become faulty. When I was researching the information for this presentation, I came across this BMW information you can see here. So this is directly out of a BMW document, and it explains how the DME determines if the fuel level sensors are working correctly based on consumption of fuel, because as it says here, it can measure the amount of fuel injected into the engine. I'm not going to read this for you because that's pointless, but I just wanted to make you aware that if there is a mismatch between the sensors and the calculated amount of fuel that should be used, then you will get this fuel level plausibility error code, P0461 or P144B. So I just wanted to make you aware of that. That would be true on my car, that will be true on a road car, just the same. Okay, let's look at the conclusions. So the first thing is, and this was important because nobody I spoke to was really quite sure about what actually is the capacity of one of these cars, the fuel tank capacity, and it turns out it's 58 to 59 litres. The fuel gauge is remarkably accurate, so really pleased with that, and you could use that in a race to determine how much fuel you've got left. The CAN messages are, the values in them represent the non-linear effect of the little float and the arm and the potentiometer. So it's not linear, but it's still useful information. I may build it into my onboard computer actually. I'm thinking about doing that. To produce a linear value for the gauge, there probably is a lookup table inside the DME, as I discussed earlier. The AIM Solo seems to really track the fuel level well, although the absolute value is not percentage of tank left. It's so if you take that into account, that it doesn't truly represent the value of the in the tank, then you can use the fuel percentage to actually measure how much fuel you've got left. So one thing you can do, if you're familiar with the AIM Solo data logger, and in particular with the software you use to analyze the data, which is called Race Studio 3, you could create a maths channel that converts this fuel percentage value into a real value of litres based on that table that we used earlier. And if we've got a faulty sensor, then we're going to get one of these error codes logged as a DTC. Yeah, DTC. Diagnostic trouble code, that's it. Just remembered it. This was a really hard project for me. It was hard collecting the data. That's why there's been such a long gap between my videos, actually, if I'm frank, because usually I put out a video every week, and I think it's been more than 2 weeks since I put out the last video. So I hope you found it useful. I think it's really useful understanding the accuracy of some of these metrics. Particularly for me, this AIM Solo one is particularly useful because I can now correctly interpret the data that I get in my data logger when I'm analysing the race, after the race. Hope you found that useful, and I'll catch you on the next one.